Welcome to Unit 5, an era from 1750 to 1900 that is commonly called the Age of Revolution. But it's really more than that. It's not just an age of revolution, it's an age of total domination by the Western world. Which perhaps leads us to an important question. What exactly do we mean by the Western world? Well, there's a lot of ways that can be defined depending on who you ask. Some people call it the entire Western Hemisphere, almost all of Europe, and some other key areas as well. But probably the more common definition, the one that we will tend to use for the most part in this unit at least, would be more matched by the darker blue areas on this map. The western half of Europe and sections of North America, like Canada and the United States, and other parts of the English-speaking world, like Australia and New Zealand. If the Middle Ages and the Renaissance were defined by what I was calling isms, the Age of Discovery, defined perhaps by the 3 E's and the 4 G's, well, in a sense, this era can be defined by what I call the 4 I's, although one needs to recognize that all 4 I's are, pun intentional, interrelated. The first of those I's is independence. National independence being a critical part of this, whether it be from political and military revolution, or the rise and strengthening of a concept that has existed for a long time but takes on new meaning here, nationalism. It's not only national independence, however, it's also personal independence, evidenced by the rise of emancipation from slavery and servitude, and changes in human identity and how we understand ourselves through science. The second of those I's is industrialization. Not just the Industrial Revolution, although certainly that is a big part of it, but it's even bigger than just that. The third I, imperialism, in which the Western world projects its strength and its opinions and its ideas out on the rest of the world and imposes them on others. And the last of those I's is immigration, the mass movement of people as a result of independence, industrialization, imperialism, and more. Our last unit left the center of the world defined as really the Atlantic axis, the connections between the Eastern Hemisphere and the Western Hemisphere. New ideas had changed our perception of the world and our understanding of how we fit within it. That included all kinds of new things in that last unit, whether it be new ideas in culture in the Renaissance, new religions that came with the Reformation, exploration and colonization, the rise of new economic theories, originally things like mercantilism, and ending it with the idea that was critically important for this unit, that of laissez-faire capitalism. New concepts of science and the scientific revolution and our understanding of who and where we fit within this world and this universe, and of course the political enlightenment as well. Well, that's a lot of change in that last unit, and it really can only lead to one thing: revolution. Certainly there were political and military revolutions, and that's where we'll start this unit. Whether it be in the United States, or the revolution in France, which transformed Europe. That included not just the original French Revolution, evidenced by the storming of the Bastille, but then the rise of an incredible leader who changed so much of Europe, Napoleon. One of the favorites of the College Board, the revolution in Haiti, the first successful slave revolt in all of history. And there are the revolutions that took place in the rest of Latin America. Simón Bolívar, that we see pictured here, being the leader of one of them, but not all of them. We can look and will look at the conditions that lead to these and other revolutions, but it's important as we do so that you keep asking yourself important questions. What conditions really justify the use of revolution, particularly violent revolution? How bad is bad enough? Obviously, there's no simple answer to that question. But independence is about more than just political and military changes within nations. It's also about independence for the individuals. And so in this unit, we will be talking specifically about the emancipation of people from slavery and serfdom and other forms of servitude. There's many examples we could look at, but the two that we will focus on most notably occur first in the United States, where my friend Abraham Lincoln emancipated the slaves in the 1860s, but also from a similar era, the freedom from serfdom in Russia. But independence also manifests itself in a new sense of identity for nations, the rise during this era of a growing sense of nationalism between people. Nationalism is complicated. It can unite people, as it did in the case of Germany, under the work of one of my all-time favorites, Otto von Bismarck. But not only can it unite people, it also can divide people, as we saw in cases like Southeastern Europe in the Balkans and in Austria as well. With all those inclusions and exclusions that can come from uniting and dividing people, it also changes our hopes and our identity. And so we see nationalism creating the dreams of nations that may not even exist yet. By the later part of the 19th century, we see the rise of a new concept, Zionism, one that we will need to explore at least in a little bit of detail during this unit. Not only did national identities change, so did our sense and understanding of ourselves as individuals. Just because the scientific revolution formally ended doesn't mean that we didn't continue to have new understandings of our world, and particularly our place within it. Science continues to advance in the 19th century, notably marked by a couple of key scientists, one of them, Charles Darwin, who changed our entire understanding and view of the physical animal that we call man. But it wasn't just the physical animal that's involved. Sigmund Freud changed our entire understanding of mental and emotional makeup of human beings. Independence can change many things, but revolution takes many forms, as we learned in the last unit when we saw revolution in the form of the Renaissance or the Reformation or the Scientific Revolution. While the age of revolution might have caused changes in how people governed and who was doing the governing, there was also other types of changes. Our second I, that of industrialization, and the Industrial Revolution changed, well, it changed everything. You can barely do a compare-contrast essay during the age of revolution, let alone a change-over-time essay, let alone a museum paper, without accounting for the massive impact of the Industrial Revolution. For indeed, industrialization did change everything. Part of it comes from how people worked. The development of new technology like the steam engine, the use of fossil fuels, and the rise of new technology and techniques like interchangeable parts. It also changed the way people are living. Cities were built with new materials, iron and steel. But it's not just how those cities were built, it's what they look like. Massive issues with pollution, with crowding, with the development of entirely new communities called suburbs, and the changes within those areas, like the rise of electricity. Industrialization may have changed how we work and where we live, but it also changed what we do with our lives. The role of the family changed dramatically during this time, as did the role of women. Industrialization also changed how we and the goods we produce move from place to place. Part of it is technological, the development of new things like the steamboat and the automobile, but most notably and importantly during this era is the development of the railroad system, the train. Entirely new mechanisms required entirely new networks, road systems to be sure, but particularly the railroad tracks that interconnect the world. It's best demonstrated by looking at a map of Europe in 1840 and the railroad tracks that existed at that time. A fairly simple and fairly Spartan map, I think you will agree. By 1880, just a few decades later, the system of railroad tracks that connected Europe had changed dramatically, and what we see looks entirely different as a result. Transportation may well be a form of communication between people, but there were other technologies involved during this era as well. The development of things like the telegraph and the telephone, the photograph and the phonograph. Technology totally transformed our communication. Unfortunately, industrialization also transformed the way we wage war. The development of all sorts of new technology made war a far deadlier and more difficult problem during this time period. Notably, there were inventions like the Gatling gun, the precursor to the machine gun, but it also includes ironclad ships, grenades, different types of guns and rifles. The list goes on and on. Indeed, industrialization brought many challenges and raised many new issues. For example, there is the question of what really is fair. How does everyone benefit from the changes of industrialization? Or perhaps one might even ask whether everyone should benefit from the economic changes. And so models were created to try to address that. One of them really occurred at the end of the Enlightenment era, the development of laissez-faire capitalism, but it now became critically important in guiding much of Europe and the industrial world during the 19th century. But there were alternative theories as well, perhaps the largest and most important of those being socialism. Karl Marx, that we see pictured here, brought one version of socialism to the world, but there are many that we need to consider. Not only is there the issue of how we distribute fairly between people, but there is also the question about how we make those changes happen. New ways were looked at and explored during this era. Two of the more notable ones that we'll look at is the rise of civil disobedience, as evidenced by the work of Henry David Thoreau and the Transcendentalists. And perhaps as a counterpoint to that, we might also look at the rise in the use of terrorism during this time, as seen in places like Russia.